Good evening, comrades. Brilliant music. Every time I hear it, it makes me very happy, which is, of course, what we're talking about tonight. It's Have Your Say on Joy and Revolution. We had a program last week where we had a really interesting interview with the anthropologist Jerome Lewis, who was talking about what important role joy plays in hunter-gatherer society, or primitive communism, if you want to call it like this, where things, for example, aren't strictly divided into work and play, and where joy comes from collective experiences. And a similar point was made by Ken Loach later in the show. We're now going to show a brief interview with Alexis Sayle, who's talking about finding the funny side of politically not so funny periods. And we're going to talk to Norman Thomas and Glenn Jenkins, and then we're opening it up to comments and contributions from the floor, because Have Your Say is, of course, about the audience, where you want to hear the views of the audience. So we're just going to quickly show this video interview we've done a little while ago. Just to start this off, I mean, lots of revolutions obviously are bloody, violent. You know, you have to fight the police, you have to fight the army, but you'll also see lots of joy in those moments. Like the Russian Revolution led to an explosion of art. French Revolution, you know, you had a lot of singing, and the Marseillaise came from that. And Iran at the moment, you have people in the streets, and the police are shooting people, but you also see them kissing and dancing and singing. How important do you think is joy in changing the world?
Well, I would go back slightly before that in a way and say that part of the offer of socialism has often been a kind of finger wagging kind of, you must do this because it's morally right, and you know, it's been a very joyless kind of appeal, really. And I think that the socialists should make much more of the fact that socialism will bring you joy, really. And that also gives you a kind of a line into your opponents, in a sense, because you're saying to your opponents, capitalists and bankers who are by and large miserable, that doesn't stop them ruining the planet, but to say you can be joyful too, and the way to do that is to stop doing these terrible things that you're doing. So I've been for a while now thinking that, you know, the proposition of socialism must be much more about that, really. I mean, then coming to your question, I mean, it's your question about the joyfulness of revolutions is partly about the proximity of danger. I think that just the prospect of getting shot, you know, makes you extraordinarily excited. You know, to be in any kind of riot is the most profoundly kind of exciting experience, I think. So it's partly about that, but then it's also obviously about solidarity and you know, I think one of the tactics that the right uses is also that if you attack a revolution, as say the Soviet Revolution, that very quickly that joyfulness is sacrificed for a kind of grim kind of war kind of mentality, really. You know, I mean, you saw that very quickly with the Soviet Union, that explosion of joyful propaganda didn't last that long. And the reason for it was the Civil War, really, and the actions of the Western powers. So, you know, I mean, it's a win-win for them, really, because they either physically destroy the revolution or the revolution destroys itself, really, I think, you know, by abandoning joyfulness, I think, because they say, well, we've got to get this fight. We've got to save the revolution. We've got to root out spies. We've only got to have the most basic propaganda.
That's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, that's what Marx said, you know, you have to be at a place of abundance where you actually, there's so much, you know, possibility of having enough food, enough of everything, but we don't have to, you know, lock people up or limit food, etc.
Right. But I think as soon as you get to the point where you say, you know, the revolution, you know, will be defeated if we don't take these authoritarian measures, then the revolution is defeated anyway. So
absolutely, a revolution without dance is not your revolution.
It isn't really. No, and that kind of authoritarianism inevitably lets the most humorless and joyless of people into power. You know, gives them a authority, you know, Stalin.
Do you have hope that there is a time when we can make, you know, that a revolution could be made in a, you know, democratic and joyful manner?
I think so. There's no sort of point really if you don't. I think it seems the only way forward, and obviously people are looking for ways to do that. There's this, you know, perhaps I've heard some criticism, but perhaps the experiment with kind of revolutionary kind of feminism in Rojava is a Marxist kind of. People keep looking, you know. People are creative, you know.
Yeah, and definitely the time is right for change now.
Yeah, and I think we've also seen those other models on the left have failed, really. I think, you know, that awful kind of proceduralism of the left, you know.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about this. I mean, you were a member of the Young Communist League and I think another organization.
Communist Party of Britain, brackets, Marxist-Leninist.
That one. And, you know, I mean, I don't think you were a member of the Labour Party, but those meetings, I mean, they will destroy any kind of joy that anybody would feel. I mean, how do you think the left could organize in a more joyful or interesting, engaging way?
It's perhaps a deliberate tactic to exclude all but the most kind of fanatical, all but those who are dead inside, you know, the sort of right of the Labour Party who are a kind of a zombie class, really, the people who are eaten away from the inside by their own ambition. And you know, that kind of meeting benefits them. And I think the left can also fall into that trap of, you know, of doing a lot of stuff, like in the Labour Party, just for the sake of advanced spending weeks on creating motions that are never going to get passed, or if they get passed, they're only going to be thrown in the bin. And I think, why are you doing this? You know, you do it just to keep yourself busy. If you're going to get a revolutionary movement, it's got to be bottom up. But on the other hand, I've always been a fan of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they only let people speak for 3 minutes before you're shown a yellow card. So I think it's really important that people shouldn't be allowed to talk endlessly, because that's another kind of trope of left-wing meeting. If you can't say what you want in 3 minutes, then it's probably...
Or another favorite is repeating what the person just said, but you know,
yeah, all that empty. Yeah, so I think it's got to be from the crowd. It's got to be from the bottom up, but make it fucking snappy as well.
Yeah. How do you see yourself, your role as a political comedian? Where do you find inspiration? I think you mentioned Brecht in the past.
First of all, I have to say that I've always found it really important that you didn't try and be didactic with your comedy, that if you see your comedy as having a role in enabling political change, then you're kind of fucked from the start, really, that hampers you. I think that's a tremendous mistake. And I know there are other artists who would disagree, but I think that is a template, really, but never to see it as having a revolutionary purpose, really, but to talk about those ideas. And if it excites ideas, but I think you've got to create. I mean, comedy, I think, is also about critiquing yourself and critiquing where you come from. And a great deal of my comedy, certainly in the early days and even now, was about mocking the left, really.
Yeah, in a
I think that was really
way.
Yeah, but in an affectionate way. I mean, it's always made it clear that my allegiances were with the left. Yeah. There was a photographer called Red Saunders, I think Trotskyist, who was very instrumental in Rock Against Racism and Red Wedge. And I remember doing a benefit for them, I think, in Brockwell Park. And after I came off, he said, you know, why are you doing all this stuff about the left? You should be criticizing the Tories. And I said, well, what's the fucking point of that? You know, these people already know about the fucking Tories. Why, you know, and I think he had that idea that, with Red Wedge and Rock Against Racism and stuff, that it could be political too. Maybe he was right, but that was never my inclination, you know.
That's interesting, though. I mean, a lot of lefties, when they do art or write books or so, it does tend to be, you know, I'm going to change the world this way, etc. You never have that. You never even considered that you could, you know, somehow change people's mind.
No, not through art. No, I mean the way you change the world is through politics. Really, I think that it just hampers you as an artist. I think. I mean, I wanted people to make people laugh. Really.
Mm. And you see that quite separately. Politics and art, they're separate for you, are they?
Well, they sort of bleed into each other in that a lot of my comedy is political. Obviously, it's about politics. So no, they're intertwined. But you know, comedy doesn't exist if people don't laugh. I mean, although you'd be hard pushed to realize that sometimes.
Bertolt Brecht, he thought he changes people, doesn't he? How does he inspire you, if not that way?
Yeah, I mean, a tremendous. I mean, I suppose Brecht partly because I don't know whether I'm much more. Brecht's theories always spoke to me much more than, say, you know, Stanislavski or somebody like that. So I loved an allision between cabaret and theatre, which I think was very innovative. You know, so he was obsessed with the kind of cabaret scene in Germany. You know, very inspirational, I think, and that whole kind of idea of alienation, of stepping outside and suddenly taking people of surprising people, of not taking them where they think they are going. You know, well, he didn't, I guess, invent that. It's done amazingly in his work. Really, he probably did think that his work could affect political change. You know, but there's a very funny comedian called Peter Cook from the 1960s, Fringe, and he said he opened a club in Soho called the Establishment Club, and he said he wanted the Establishment Club to replicate all those cabaret clubs in the Weimar Republic that had such success defeating the rise of Hitler.
Very good.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, you asked about a socialist joke, would probably be that as well, really, don't it?
Yeah. How difficult is it in periods like, you know, the last 7-8 years with the campaign against Corbyn, you know, destroying our biggest hopes in bloody decades? How difficult is it to find humor in that? Or how do you see your role in periods like that?
For me, it's been a tremendous opportunity because, yeah, your hope's destroyed, but me, you know.
Well done, you.
My last radio series trended at #1 on Twitter, and I think because I was also probably the only kind of even leading or semi-leading in, you know, kind of entertainment figure who didn't resile at all from Corbyn, who didn't accept any of the smears, who absolutely stayed. You know, my last series on Radio 4, which just finished, you know, I explicitly say that you know, the left racism doesn't exist, it's a lie, which I don't think is particularly brave thing to say, but people are so kind of intimidated.
You have anti-Semitism allegations leveled at you as well, but you just laugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm lucky in this. I mean, I have several advantages. That obviously being Jewish is, you know, is an advantage. Although that doesn't, as we've seen, that doesn't necessarily save you. But also because I've been around so long, that I've been in the entertainment business for, I mean, professionally for 43 years now.
So cancel culture hasn't hit you at all then?
No. I think I adapt. I mean, I think that, you know, mores change. You adapt. I made a resolution very early on not to complain. You know, the primary directive is to make people laugh, and then all the other shit secondary. You know.
Yeah. You answered my last question. What's your best joke? Is that what it is? Have you got another one?
It's about austerity, you know, and how about the idea that the worldwide financial crash of 2008 was caused by Wolverhampton having too many libraries. Which is one of my own jokes, but I mean, we're going to go through another period of that now where somehow, you know, failures of the world economic market mean your local library will have to close. It's absurd. It's austerity is a political choice, and it's a device to transfer wealth to the wealthy.
Yeah, well, they're keeping libraries open now as warm places.
Well, that's true. Well, woohoo, there you go.
Financing libraries, finally, yay!
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, and
thank you.
I'm very happy.
Yeah, no, I think that it seems very, the series that you're doing seems original, really. Like I say, there's too much concentration on the small picture, really, without looking at the big while we're doing this shit,
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to reclaim.
Yeah.
Giant revolution. Thank you very much, Alexei.
Good day. Bye.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. And we wanted to talk about some of the issues raised by Alexei with our own Norman Thomas, who's helped Jackie Walker to write and direct her lynching show. Normally, the thing that puzzled me a little bit by what Alexei was saying, and I pressed him a little bit on that, is that he doesn't see his role as changing minds. That surprised me a bit. How do you see the role of the artist in, influencing politics, influencing people's minds about what's happening? I mean, surely there must be some kind of, that must be on your mind as well when you're doing a show or something. You need to unmute, Comrade.
Yeah, I've unmuted now. It's fascinating about the question of changing people's minds. I mean, Alexei says that Brecht was a great influence on him, and of all the dramatists of the modern era, Brecht was the guy who wanted to change people's minds, and not only through the content of his work, but through the actual structure, through the way it was presented, because that was the basic aim of him doing all kinds of things to undermine the illusion of theatre. I mean, Brecht his first priority wasn't to change society, but first of all, to change theatre. That was basically what he was talking about. I've got to change theatre first, then you change people's minds, because he saw theatre, bourgeois theatre, as creating an illusion, which was basically a sort of reality. Well, he thought that was absolutely the worst thing that drama could do, and therefore you undermined it. You basically showed the workings of the play. You spoke to the audience. You sang songs. You did anything to undermine the idea. You put up signs saying how the scene was going to end, so that to take away any sort of suspense. Because what he wanted to do was to destroy that illusion and to talk about what was actually the important things that were going on. And when you look at what Alexei does, his comedy does feed off that. If you look at his Radio 4 program, The Imaginary Sandwich Bar, the song, the opening song of the program, is a sort of Kurt Weill type song, and he doesn't try. The Imaginary Sandwich Bar in itself is a kind of a joke, because he is. If it was an ordinary Radio 4 type situation comedy, there would be other characters and they would have some sort of dialogue. What Alexei does, he deliberately mocks that, because when he introduces another character, he just puts on a silly voice, a very funny silly voice, but it's just him. So all the characters are just him, and he basically cuts to the chase. So his recent thing where he did a slam poem attacking Keir Starmer. Well, he doesn't, he doesn't kind of introduce it into the conversation in any kind of even vaguely realistic way. He just launches into an attack on Keir Starmer. Why I hate Keir Starmer, and it's a wonderful piece of poetry attacking Starmer in every different which way you can, and it's wonderful. And it's not at all like the kind of rather lazy caricaturing that you get from other stand-up comics. He makes a huge thing out of it. So I think
say though that he's kind of preaching to the converted, basically. He makes jokes for the left. He doesn't think he's going to change anybody's mind through satire.
That's the biggest thing, really. That's the thing. Are you just preaching to the converted? Are the people that come and listen to Alexei say, are they all just the same people who would have thought like that anyway? And that is one of the biggest issue. I mean, this actually takes me back, because when I originally saw Alexei Sayle back in the 70s, I wasn't that keen on him, to be honest. He seemed to be a bit of a nasty man. He was shouting at the audience and being very aggressive all the time. It sort of put me off. And I didn't really start getting into him again till a long time later, 2000, 2017, I'd say. So it was a long time. When I was helping Jackie with her one-woman play, and we were trying to get some sort of, because what the idea of that, the whole idea of that play was to get to the outside, the usual suspects, to break through the echo chamber, to get to people who didn't know what was going on. But undoubtedly, most of the audience that came were people who already knew about it. That's because you had to get them through social media, so they were already hooked to some extent. But the hope was that by putting it in theatres all over the country, which is we did, in the Edinburgh Festival, internationally, we went to all sorts of different places. So the hope was it would get reviewed or get word about, and it would get out to other people. The only mention it had in the whole of the mainstream media was a review by Alexei Sayle, which is what turned me on to him in the first place. You can still see it if you want to. It's called On My Radar, Observer, Alexei Sayle. That was the name of the feature that it was part of. He would do a week of a celebrity would do a week of their things they'd seen in the arts, and he wrote a very good review of it, and it's still there. 2007.
But Norman, one thing that it did do, I do agree with you that what we captured there was an audience of people, mostly, not all, because quite a few people did come who knew nothing, but quite the majority knew something about it, but they didn't have the full information. So it's not a binary position about these people who know nothing and these people who know something. Actually, there's also a midway audience of people who know something but aren't able to get the full information. Now I want to bring in here Glenn Jenkins, if we can have Glenn on, who was also on last week, because you've used art, culture, music, dance, whatever, to bring people, to agitate, to organize, and to work politically, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, over many years, the thing is, Jackie, what we do by its very nature, in terms of the Exodus years, our sound system, is we mobilize thousands of people and occupy land. And there's a demand for use of that land. There's a campaign for the right to use that land in a non-capitalist way. So no big rents to land, etc. You know what I mean? That's a very, very political thing. What we do now, in terms of, it's funny, Alexei was referring to, it needs to be from the bottom up. And that, to me, is the critical point. But it needs to be a joyful experience from the bottom up, not more mimicking the oppressor, we call it, the old bland hierarchical meetings, go to sleep, whittle down to the same old few, So funny, it's a great time to be talking about it. Alexei says, let's get on it quick. Well, good news is, Alexei, in Luton, in Marsh Farm, where I live and work and do all that, we do a thing called bottom-up development, which is about organising in the community amongst all of our neighbours, and everything from, building community centre, a community farm, all these notions of working together to achieve stuff. And the latest is neighbourhood assemblies, which are joyous, which don't happen every week. They're once every 3 months. And this is we're just taking the temperature, we call it, for this on the estate. And not canvassing, more talking to people about how do you feel about a new way of doing democracy at a local level. And the response has been, most people feel we don't have a voice, but everybody feels we should have a voice. And that's a really encouraging thing, but what they don't want is the tired old CLP model or community meeting model. So what we're doing is we're going to have these quarterly assemblies where we made an appeal on the estate. We said, if you're an artivist, if you're an activist artist, come and help us spice up democracy and have a popular participatory experience, but with arts, gallery, with people's artworks in it, spoken word, in amongst the civic duties, if you like. So the idea is, in a nutshell, is that people would say, oh man, I missed the People's Assembly because I was in Cornwall, rather than I wouldn't dream of going to such a boring enterprise. And if we can achieve that, then you know, a more participatory, engaged decision making at a local level by lots of us, not by the same old community few, would be a massive thing to achieve in I think, in UK politics.
I agree. And actually, I remember, I know I'm going to say a bad word here, momentum, but I remember in the early days of Momentum and the way we were growing, I'm talking about what we were doing locally in Thanet, and the way we were growing was to make everybody feel that their presence was important. It was vital that they should come, that they would be listened to, and actually that it would be enjoyable. And that's how we grew.
Yeah.
And it was really, really effective. And I'm really beginning to feel that in terms of the left, this is what we've got to latch on to, because we're kind of blocked out of that kind of parliamentary field. And if we keep just talking to each other in meetings that, you know, often are very interesting to those of us who are political nerds, we will get nowhere. We have got to find a way of doing it which engages people. And the way you engage people, just like Pavlov's dogs, you give people something they like and they will come back for more. And whether that is empowering them so that they know that they're important, and at the same time feeding them physically and feeding them spiritually as well. All of that is actually the way for us to go forward.
I think the one thing that kills off joy, and I think Glenn, you know, is the kind of the opposite of it. The one thing that kills off joy is hierarchy. Is there being somebody at the top who basically makes a decision, and the people down the bottom are doing nothing. The Labour Party know that. That's why they're the most hierarchical organisation in the universe. You know, kill off all the joy that you possibly can, and kill off anybody thinking they might change things, because that's what they're engineered to do, is to stop there being change. You don't want, if people start thinking, well, we're all together now, we can change things. So that's terrifying for them, because they're part of the establishment and they don't want it to happen. And why the Corbyn thing was a terrifying episode, because you had all these people shouting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn!" God knows what the party hierarchy and the powers that be were thinking of that, but they didn't like it. Absolutely not.
Can I raise something that Alexei mentioned in right at the beginning of his interview, and I think that was quite important, is that we forget to say that socialism, or after the revolution, what that we're fighting for, there will be joy, and that we're not really emphasizing that the society we're fighting for would be an entirely different society where people can live together in an entirely different way without having to slave away at work 9 hours a day, but actually find joy in other things. And, you know, for that, I think we do need to kind of work on that vision, and using art and culture to, you know, project that vision of a better future could be, I think, very, very powerful way. Are we using those methods, though? I think there's more we could be doing.
Well, I think we should do that by putting it into practice. You know, if actually socialists were seen as people who were having fun, you know, people were getting together and were being empowered, that's what would happen. And I think Norman's practice in terms of performance and your practice in terms of what you're doing with community building, Glenn, just shows us two examples of doing that.
I agree. I mean, the thing is, I think the problem is, Tina, with the socialism will be joyous down the road. I think it bears the same sort of for people when they come into this boring meeting and get told it'll be joyous down the road. But I believe that, I think what we do here, what we try and do, I believe that every day I go to work, I have much more joy at my workspace because we created it. It's kind of autonomous, you know, and the model, the business model, if you want to call it that, is a socialist business model. So it's when you're building the alternative on a daily, and when we do joyous things like the Rebel Tent, the Levelers Festival, which is nothing to do with commerce, no one's making any money there in our area, you know what I mean? It's all about bringing the message and engaging. You know, sometimes we can think, we're not preaching to the converted. We're more sort of like vibing with the already to be strong together, you know. But if that's all it is, not then leading, it's not an action call, it's not a springboard to action, then it can just be enjoyable and nothing, you know, nothing down the road sort of thing. So I think it is about doing it now. Be socialist now, be the change you want to see in the world, you know. So if we put on an event, it's in its principle and its concept and its whole spirit, it's not, you know, I'd call it, I don't like socialist on its own because of the top down stuff, because of the hierarchy, scares the shit out of me, if I'm honest with you. Do you know what I mean? The sort of like willingness to be authoritarian. You know, Starmer's the embodiment of that, you know. It's, and I know he's not a socialist, but you know what I mean? You know, top down socialism, but anarcho-socialism, more freedom socialism, building from below, to me is the future.
Comrades, does anybody want to ask a question or make a contribution from the floor? This is your chance. If you would like to get involved, please click raise hand. Ideally switch on your camera so we can see you when you're asking a question. Ian wants to ask a question, but there you are. Oh, your camera still doesn't work, does it? Clearly.
It doesn't, yeah.
Okay,
I think it might be easier if I just put it off because it's, yeah. I just wanted to say about, I've just come in, so I'm sorry if it's already been mentioned, but the effect of campaigning on mental health. I think a few minutes I've caught, there's been a lot of talk of sitting in circles or everyone's crew in the chat and anarcho-syndicalism and all that kind of thing. I think there's a worry about the tyranny of structurelessness, that there might be more to do with the content than the form. And as Glenn was saying, that Starmer's not doing it on behalf of some socialism later, but really for the opposite reason, isn't he? He's a fighter for the old society. I must say, from my own experience, I was thinking about this earlier today, graduating around the time of the big crash where there was 100 people going for every customer service job. Also a big political and employment issue that I went straight into my graduation, so I didn't even have time to do a proper job search. Straight out of uni, going into a period of long-term unemployment for a few years and anxiety. That I've had these problems. I've always found that campaigning is one of the things that actually makes you feel better. It's not the only one. Swimming and other forms of exercise are good for the body and the mind. Interacting with people in ways that don't have to be political too. But certainly if you believe in a set of political values, but also facts, the facts that you've programmed in your head about how the world is and how it could be and the dangers if it never gets there, then actually doing something towards that as a special way of making you feel better. That said, going into the Labour Party, and I don't date this to Starmer taking over, but as someone who vociferously agreed with my former party leader on the Palestinian question, dating it quite a far bit back from that. The need to keep your head down to, obviously everyone should avoid being stupid, and we should always be as strategic and sensible as we can, but to say anything that might get you into trouble at all with anyone who might just have a completely different point of view and might be acting in bad faith. I must say, in the last few months coming out of Labour, though I'll still hopefully be putting in that appeal to get back in, finding myself able to contribute on Zooms a bit more than in the previous period, to share bits of my own life. There was a great, not because I contributed to it, that a great tonic for my mood and politically speaking was last night's Workers' International network, Roger Silverman's group, meeting on the environment. And the guy gave a great perspective that I think could be a tonic to comrades' mental health who are worried about how to work through these complicated issues from a class socialist perspective. But also I was able to share on it that I got banned from Egypt under Mubarak. I met at a Fourth International Summer Camp, someone from the Red Green Alliance in Denmark. I was then disappointed she voted for the Libyan war. This sounds absurdly narcissistic, but they came out quite organically, and from what the political contributions I was making. But I just feel like I'm coming up for air. I think that the way things went under Corbynism is more a series of mistakes to learn from in terms of taking care of our own activists' mental health. I think for people sometimes more seriously than me, it really did take a toll. Obviously, it can't all be fun. It is duty as well as play, but you shouldn't be getting abandoned by your own side in that way.
Wind up now,
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. This is a new me being too gregarious. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that, and I don't know if it's already been raised about that effect.
Can we remind people that what we really, it's really nice to have people's contributions, but what we want is to get through nice range of contributions. So if people could just, be a little bit succinct about what they want to say, then we'll get the conversation moving a bit more.
Can I ask you, Glenn, something about something that Ian just said? It's, for example, the issue of climate change. Not a barrel of laughs, really, is it? I mean, we do need some real dramatic action, radical, measures need to be taken globally on a global level to, fight for the survival of humanity and the planet and stuff, So it's not all joyful always, is it? And there are some kind of things we need to organize which are not fun. The overthrow of the bourgeoisie, for example, there will be unpleasant sides as well. How do we incorporate joy into those kind of
No, I mean, I want to be really clear that I'm in no way saying that these bottom-up things should be disconnected from the wider struggle to replace the bourgeoisie, etc. There's no way. All I'm saying is that I'm confident that the revolution. I mean, Emma Goldman, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of it. In that spirit, I don't think we'll make the change if making the change isn't spirited, enjoyable, attractive, And what I find is that we call our space with Fidel Gastro's. We've got a social action hub, we call it, because it's not a social club; it's a social action club. It's about bringing people together in a space where we love socializing and everything from blues, dance to, Jackie will tell you, we do a lot of stuff there, community stuff, doing our own multicultural thing. But out of that comes organization. Out of that, like we do community organizer training and things like that at the space, and bottom-up development, short days in bottom-up development, how the local economy stacks up, where we spend our money, how much of that could we keep in the community, them sort of things. But the wider change, definitely, I mean, I think I'm confident there's a collapse going on. And if we don't organize ourselves, then the right wing and people like this are going to take advantage of that collapsing environment. It always happens, doesn't it? So the left need, I agree with Jackie, the left need to organize, and we need to do it in a spirited, spiritually sound way. That's what I think.
Thank you, comrades. Veronica, please. You need to unmute yourself, comrade. Sorry. There should be a little button flashing up. There you go.
I'm so sorry. The word spiritual just came up in Glenn's remarks just now, and also Jackie used the word spirituality. I prefer to use the word emotion. As an arts educator, as I have been, and campaigner for the arts in education, I'd like to make the case that politics is not averse to art and culture, because it should be embracing the arts and culture, because it is through the arts that young people and older people alike understand the human predicaments and humanity and joy, and laughter is very important. Of course it is. Amusement is important because people begin to feel happy. Being part of a cultural event or being part of a show, if you like, Alexei was talking about his gigs. If you're laughing and enjoying yourself with other people, you feel happier. You feel happier. And you know that's because you have been affected deeply in your heart and soul about the state of whatever it is we're discussing. And one of the most remarkable things that I came across during the first campaign of the 2017 campaign, I suppose it was it, when Jeremy came to visit Reading, where one of the seats near me, where he was really up against it, but there was a huge crowd of people, which was when the Labour Party, of course, increased its membership vastly. The key moment for me and a lot of people who were, not because I wasn't a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn and had been a socialist all my life, but because I know what the impact was and how important it was for teachers and educators and artists and people who understood the sort of totality of the human experience, was when he mentioned, I think probably for the first time, and this went on throughout his time as leader, the importance of the arts in education, particularly art and music. Now, it is quite obvious that the arts and music affect the way are involved in helping to create generations of people and humanity as a whole, the ability to understand their own emotions and to be able to express their own emotions and to be truthful about emotions. And that includes being angry as well as sad, as well as happy.
Thank
you. And all that is involved. And I think that's why we have lost so much when we have not been, in the last few years, when we have not been able to talk. A lot of people are talking about the CLP boring meetings and hierarchies and so on and da-da-da. But there is no opportunity, if you're in a classroom or in an art class or a literature class or a political meeting, you cannot educate people unless you educate their emotions, unless you appeal to them at a deep sense, a really deep sense of what is right and what is wrong. And that's what the arts do. And that's why during pandemic times and lockdown and all the restraints that have been put on us for CLP meetings, for instance, those of us who are used to talking to groups of people and know how understanding it is to pick up expressions, pick up body language, understand anger, understand laughter, understand.
Thank you, comrade. Sorry, we have to wind you up now. Good art teaches about the human condition, doesn't it? Quite right. Norman, did you want to reply to something or wanted to say something?
Yes, I mean, just to pick, I mean, I agree that arts are important, but there are arts and there are arts. And I think we have to be careful not to say that all joy and singing and comedy and laughter is all necessarily a good thing, because that's where Brecht came into it, really. I mean, Brecht said, yeah, you get theatre and you get songs and you get comedy, but it's not necessarily the good sort. A lot of it comes with a worldview that isn't a very nice worldview. You can have songs, but you can have people singing the national anthem at the Labour Party conference. That's supposed to be uplifting. That's supposed to make them all feel better. And what Brecht set out to do was to say, what is the conventional theatre, the stuff that you're being fed, the theatre that people are being fed, is basically lulling them into a sense that the world as it is okay, that everything's all right, that this is reality. And in comedy terms, it's, you know, jokes about mother-in-laws and, you know, this is how the world is. It's full of these stereotypes and tropes. And you've got Jim Davidson trading all sorts of racism in his comedy and making people laugh with it. So you have actually got to have a war of art. You've got to say this art is not art because it propagates a view of the world that we don't want. And Alexei Sayle, whatever he says about I'm just making people laugh, he makes them laugh in a specific way. And I think that's a very important thing. Brecht also set out to, what the basic thing that Brecht was trying to do was to say, it's possible to change things. You don't have to have things like that. I'm presenting a picture of the world in my drama, whatever it is, but it's based on the idea that it's all possible to be changed, and changed in a way that maybe the mass of people would prefer than the way the world is now. It's the possibility of change is the kind of art and comedy and entertainment that we want. But it's the one that the establishment doesn't want.
Thank you, Conrad. Mike, please.
Thanks, Tina. As always, I'm really enjoying the conversation, and I don't think you can artificially separate the joy of art from a political struggle. They're kind of indivisible, as we're seeing tonight. And for me personally, and I see others were saying similar things in the chat box, it was music that initially catalysed my interest in politics, particularly listening to 60s and 70s soul music, which then turned me on to the civil rights movement. And I discovered Angela Davis and Malcolm X and Eldridge Cleaver and people like that. And then later on, listening to bands like The Jam and The Clash and the Redskins and so on. And it's also, as Janet Silva was saying, it's a sustenance. You know, it's not easy being a socialist, and at times we need the comfort and the reassurance and the sustenance of good art. But as others are saying, and I'm sure Glenn's experienced this many times, the joy of crowds, the joy of being in a crowd is an extremely powerful thing. It doesn't matter whether you're a football match, a gig, a demonstration. And it's no mistake that the Corbyn chant came alive at Glastonbury, because that's an environment where people begin to realise their own power and their own potential for spirituality as well, and not the spirituality of organised religion, but the spirituality that we've been talking about recently, and which, of course, is kind of contained in Marx's opiate of the masses, that capitalism is a system that sucks the spirit from people, sucks us dry, bleeds us dry, and sometimes when we're in a crowd, and that the hope and the expectation and the energy and the animation of a crowd is an extraordinarily dangerous thing for the ruling class, because it's unmanageable. You can't manage crowds like that. And of course, there are bad crowds, as Norman says. You know, we've all been in demonstrations, counter demonstrations where there's bad crowds. But mostly, if we trust human beings, which as socialists we do, crowds are a wonderful, wonderful thing, because that spirit is unleashed, it's unhinged, and it's no longer under the control. There's no mistake that, you know, in Orwell's 1984, the Anti-Sex League was not just about wagging its finger and saying sex is dirty and reproduction is terrible. It's about controlling people, but controlling the pleasures of life and making sure that people are cowed and insular and atomized. And as Glenn will know, there's nothing more powerful than previously atomized people coming together and realizing, Christ Almighty, we are pretty strong here. So what, you know, so art, I think, is indivisible from the struggle. Of course, politics is primary, but can't keep the politics going sometimes unless we have art kicking us up the bum.
Thanks, Mike. Great contribution. Glenn, you want to reply to some of that?
Echo first. Do you know what I mean, Mike? That was just spot on as far as I'm concerned. I just wanted to flag up that I dropped in the chat box exactly that, Mike. You know, about there's a woman called Barbara Ehrenreich. I can't pronounce her last name. Yeah, she wrote this book called Dancing in the Streets, and I'd been making this talk somewhere, and someone come up to me after, because one of the things I was saying was that at 6 a.m. when the sun's rising, 5 a.m. and there's a unifying beat across thousands of people in the morning, and the smoke's rising from the bonfires in the sandpit, you get this, like, this is ancient. This is from the beginning of humanity. We've been doing this. And what Barbara studied, she's an anthropologist, and what she studied was that all throughout human history, no matter what part of the globe, there are these, what she calls collective joy experiences, massive collective joy experience. And the Romans or the Pharaoh or whoever it be always clamps down on it.
Yeah.
Slave owners were terrified of slave carnivals or indigenous people carnivals, but for them slave carnivals, and they would suppress these events as a matter of, she tracks it all the way through history. There's always suppression. And what she very interestingly notes, and I know this through when we have our big dances here in Bedfordshire and when we don't have our big dances in Bedfordshire, the spirit of the town is different, because what she's saying, she's an anthropologist, she studied what they used to call melancholy, they now call depression. Levels of it, societal depression, rise whenever these collective joy experiences are suppressed. Yeah, and I'm not saying obviously depression is caused by lack of dancing. It partly is, there's loads of other factors, but it's key. I'm sorry about that.
You're fine. Okay. Thanks, Glenn. Jim, please.
Okay, indeed. Thank you, Chair. I'm old enough, in fact, to remember when the Labour Party had a songbook, and I believe that the last time it was updated was when Jim Callaghan was the Prime Minister. And I believe that I wasn't there, but I believe they was reported that when they were reviewing it, they actually sung some of the songs in it, the NEC. So maybe that would give people a laugh or something if they heard that. I think one of the other things is, if we're wanting to make joy, make people more happy, the other thing is to move towards a 4-day working week, get away from the drudgery, that here. But I'd also just finish off by saying a bit more cooperation with the cooperative movement. If the Labour Party and the colleagues in that were more cooperative, actually, setting up, in fact, small co-op businesses, that might be a way forward to bring happiness and joy, and they could all start to cooperate and organise together, selling fair trade goods and moving forward with that. Just to put that forward. I'll just finish here, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie.
Just want to say it's not by accident that the establishment, and it's Labour and Tories at the moment, are scared of two things happening in this country, which they're applauding happening in China or Iran or anywhere else. And that is people being in crowds. They don't want it because crowds are dangerous. And then if you add people feeling joyous, they really do not want that because it terrifies them. Because at that point is the point when people feel the most powerful. You will see crowds of people going up against guns because that's how it makes people feel. And whatever it is that the establishment are scared of, that's where our point of power is.
Anne is the next person from the floor. Hi.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Okay, well, firstly, I want to disagree with Jackie's point that she made earlier as well. I don't think that there needs to be simply crowds of people having fun or resisting in crowds in order to achieve change. I mean, we've seen the authorities mow down thousands and thousands of people in crowds when they've gone out to demonstrate in many countries throughout the world. We've seen the authorities clamp down on crowds, and we've seen them also wait for the crowds to disappear, like has happened. I mean, I live in Ireland. The government looks at demonstrations that happen maybe every fortnight against the current cuts. It's not worrying them at all. They're not afraid at all because they know that people are not organised and they're only organised to go on a demonstration and then go home. So I think that we need more than this. We have to have a political party that's capable of overthrowing this society. And I think that also, like, yes, obviously I want to be happy. I want to go to events. I mean, I'm not denying that. it is important, and it's important for us to look after ourselves and to have as full a life as possible. But like, we are faced with, you know, possible extinction, and it's serious. And like, sometimes I think it's come across in this meeting as though we can just go and have an event in a particular place and people can get together and feel happy and not be worried so much about the future, but it doesn't make the future go away. So I do think that there's a solution. I think that that solution needs to be political organisation. And to be fair, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, nice guy, and, you know, it was great that he brought together so many people in the Labour Party, but he wasn't going to do that, was he? I have other things to say about Jerome Lewis, who I thought was absolutely fantastic last week, but I presume my 3 minutes is up, so I'll go.
We haven't actually decided on that 3 minutes. That's the audience imposing some kind of rule. You can say something else if you want.
I don't. Well, no, the only thing I wanted to say was I thought that Jerome Lewis was absolutely excellent, and it motivated me to go and look at some of his articles and to look some more of the videos. But I think myself that needs much more time, that's a very like serious subject, the question of happiness in tribal hunter-gatherer societies, and that it ultimately, you know, depends on the question of being able to, of equality, of democracy, and of a sense of control, which are, you know, serious questions for us to talk about, rather than just the fact of it itself. I just think it was the best of these last 3 meetings, and I would think it would be great to have him on for longer. And obviously somebody's put it up in the chat there about radical anthropology, which, yeah, they're very useful group of comrades. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, and Jackie.
Yeah, I want to come back on that. I mean, and I think that's really unfair, because what I'm saying is it's part of a process. This is not about having a crowd of people or people having a party, but you cannot, what's happening now, the state of what we've got, is that you have politics divorced from the people's sense of empowerment and joy. And we have the mass of the people, even facing total extinction, being apathetic. And the question here is, how do we stop people feeling they are powerless? And we have to get back to including that, you know, socialists 50 years ago, the Peasants' Revolt, all of these revolts, they knew that. They knew that that was the way to motivate people. And what we've done is far too much of divorcing one from the other.
Norman, briefly, because we've got some other speakers who want to come in. You're very, very wiggly. Can't find a button.
Got to get Norman a computer, you know. I mean,
okay, no, it wasn't allowing me to unmute. No, I'll just say that basically when people come together, I mean, my experience of it was in Ramsgate when we had Jeremy Corbyn came, and he came to a huge outdoor rally. But I knew that a vast section of that people, they weren't socialists. They weren't Labour Party people. They were people who came and listened, riveted to Jeremy Corbyn, not because he was a great orator, but because he was a chap who seemed to be saying it's possible to change things. And they all came out, and they were looking out of their windows, out their houses and everywhere, because there was a great feeling that, oh, this is somebody who's actually saying that things are going to change. And there's all these other people who believe in it as well. So there was a process going on of something building, and people felt it. And they thought, because one of the things that motivates people to be conservative is that they think, oh, well things aren't going to change. These Labour Party people, quite rightly, they believe, are just saying this in order to get a vote. So why not vote for the people who seem to, you know, know about money anyway, because they're probably likely to benefit us. So it's that sense of a collective that is what gets people going. And Jeremy, for all his faults, was getting that going in a huge way. And if we can build that up again within a movement from the bottom up, as we're saying, then we've got something going. Thanks.
I think Anne's point was quite good on that, though, is that Corbyn didn't do that. That was exactly the problem. He left it to Momentum, and Momentum had no interest in organizing the left seriously or democratically on any level whatsoever. So there was, and I think we've all identified the problems that there were with the Corbyn leadership. It wasn't all roses. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the position we are now. There were serious mistakes made, and I think not organizing seriously the left was very much part of that problem. And a coherent political program was lacking there as well. Ian, please. I'm clicking it again. Oh, there you are. Oh no, I think I muted you again because we pressed it at the same time. Sorry.
It's no more than I deserve.
Hi, comrade.
I suppose I just want to really make a tiny point, is that there isn't really a prescription for the kind of art or popular culture or whatever that we might embrace. You can see the way in which things are very quickly incorporated. I mean, I never felt so alive as when I first went to a Clash gig or to see the Jam or whatever. But very quickly they can be kind of subsumed, and receiving successive waves of this. I could argue that all British comedy is actually class struggle by other means. I mean, you've only got to look at that famous sketch where you've got John Cleese and Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett. I'm upper class, I look down on them, and so it goes on. And what's one of the most long-running series on television? Have I Got News for You? It's just class struggle by other means. But it's very easily to incorporate it, and it's also just kind of almost a kind of lightning conductor, really. If you can do your class struggle that way, it's a harmless kind of expression of something that's there. And I think that's the point about a lot of art. It's an expression of what's there. When Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice, there were no Jews in British society because they'd all been murdered in 1290 or forcibly converted. But he was expressing something that was going on, which was about the very coming into being of capitalism. And each successive wave of art seems to express all sorts of things. And it, to a certain extent, it requires some interpretation. I mean, I'm absolutely, completely in favour of anybody being able to get up and do their thing. And what was so great about punk, really, it was just that, just in the same way that waves of stand-up comedians were able, but again, they can be quickly incorporated. So I think the one thing we can say with complete certainty is that the work of art that will express the forthcoming revolution will take us all completely by surprise. And just in the same way that we've seen, I remember walking through Soviet art galleries, and when you walk from the 1920s rooms into the 1930s rooms, the difference was so glaringly obvious. That sense of optimism and hope was kind of completely stifled by the end of the 1920s, and you end up with these grotesque so-called socialist realism. And yet, prolet cult, when it first started, was laudable in extending, trying to make art accessible for everyone, and anybody could get up and do something. And that's the brilliant bit about it. At the same time, it's also worth remembering the classics and not forgetting that just because the elite has or the ruling class has turned something like Shakespeare or whatever into an elitist pastime, we can't reclaim it. We have to reclaim it. You read Marx and Engels and all the rest of it, and they were replete with references to classic works, and for bloody good reasons. They're still worth reading, and they're still worth passing on. The idea that somehow we can't do Shakespeare because that's a bit elitist, isn't it? It's just nonsense. So all I would say is a lot of popular culture can be transient, ephemeral. It can be enormously effective at just the right moment to express what people have been feeling all along, but all of a sudden are able to sum it up. But it can and will be incorporated without something there to be able to provide some kind of impetus forwards. That's it.
Thank you, Ian. It reminded me, Rosa Luxemburg and Marx and Engels were all big fans of Goethe, who is also seen as, quite bourgeois and a bit boring, etc. But obviously he had also, it was part of the sort of liberation and Enlightenment movement, and had some great insights into socialistic futures. And he talked about the Ur-Kommunismus, etc. That's not so much quoted by many bourgeois politicians and artists, but it's very important to reclaim those artists, which often come from the art often comes from a place of trying to achieve a different society, a different world. Thank you, Ian.
Absolutely.
Anne wants to come back in, and I think we have.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I wasn't. Well, look, I wasn't trying to be unfair. I was, Jackie, but what I was, and I share your frustration with the fact that things are so difficult and that the left is so tiny and that the working class is so divorced from the left. Absolutely, I do. And here in Ireland, like the situation as I've described before, means that people, like if you go and knock on people's doors, which we have done on various occasions, and everybody says they're really frightened and they're stressed and they find it very difficult to cope, but they won't come out and do anything because they don't believe that it's going to lead anywhere. So in my experience here in Ireland, the only time then people actually really turned to the left was because the left put forward a platform, the Independent Workers organization, to stand in elections, and then people were voted in. Now you can compare that to Corbyn. He was audacious. Here's an answer. Of course it wasn't going to be ultimately, but people believed in him and his ability to change things far more than he did. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think that we need audacious politics and us on the left to fight for a revolutionary party. And I think through that process, and obviously also being involved in campaigns and stuff, then you will get somewhere. And I think that that process is the only way that we're going to achieve anything. And without that, then you may get like moments of like interlude, of having a nice time, but you won't reach the situation where humanity can actually start to express itself and to impact directly on society as a whole, and that can give that feeling of empowerment described by Jerome Lewis, which I think is the answer to the mental difficulties that we face today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for clarifying. Jackie.
Yeah, look, in a funny way, I don't think we're disagreeing, but I think you're putting too much emphasis on one way of getting there. Here we have the alienated masses who are sitting in their homes wondering how they're going to feed their kids, keep their kids warm, stop their grandparents from dying. My daughter, who works in A&E, says she's got people dying in ambulances. Every time she does a shift, she virtually comes back crying. And she said to me, why aren't you lot revolting about this? And it's a really valid question. People are dying out there. The planet is on the verge of disaster, and we're listening to bullshit politicians. And the mass of people aren't doing anything. Why is that happening? And for me, the answer is the reason why that's not happening is that they're so alienated, they're so disempowered, is they actually believe that what they do doesn't matter. And so it becomes absolutely critically important that we ignite that flame in them, which says what you do is important. And I think, I love the fact that you've engaged so much with what Jerome is saying, but that's Jerome's message. Jerome's message is, why are these people engaged in their societies and actively actors in it? It's because they have a sense of strength and communal joy and cohesiveness. And without that, you know, we can't properly get people out and to act in solidarity, in mass solidarity. So you can have as many political revolutionary parties as you want, but if people aren't getting engaged with them, it's not going to matter. You need both.
We also, of course, need a vision, don't we, of where we want to go, because in this society, I mean, you could, you know, you can sort of have joy by doing something in your own sphere, but this is also not going to change things for the vast majority of people. So it is a very much a dialectical approach.
Again, you're missing it. You can be in your home and have joy. You can go to a, you know, cinema and have joy. You can go for a walk and have joy. We're talking about mass community feeling here. And that's what Jerome was talking about. It's a totally different thing. And politically, it has a different, it's a different use of joy. And it may be that just like the indigenous people that Jerome is talking about, our problem is that we've only got a kind of one word for joy. And actually, you know, the Benjeli had more than one word for joy. If you might want to call it empowerment or exuberance or whatever it is. But whatever it is, the left isn't doing it. The left isn't doing it. And that is a problem.
Glenn.
Just want to make it the same point, but it's the same point, but in a different way. Alexei earlier on referred to the fun of riots. Yeah, he said, like, you know, wherever you are, if there's a riot, it's just. And I was at the poll tax riot. Marsh Farm, where I live, had riots, if that's what you want to call them, uprisings, others would call them. Point was that when they happen, there's a few days where the tables turn in terms of power. And after the event, it makes you realise, overstand rather than understand, that when things go back to normal, you are again disempowered completely. So the state's in charge, the police in charge. For those 3 nights, they're not. And there's this awesome feeling of freedom, release, you know, that is truly joyous. Yeah. So exhilarating, shall we say, right? And when you put that spirit together with the tribal beats, the land occupations, and the alternative use of those lands, based, because as far as I understand revolution, it's about seizing the means of production, yeah, and transforming the means of production, distribution, and exchange. That's revolution, as I understand it. And that can happen incrementally as we move along. We can be building the better world now because, you know, there's land, there's buildings, there's derelicts, particularly in this country, in the sort of wastelands of UK PLC. You know, when in the 90s, there was derelict buildings everywhere that we were occupying and using. So I just think this whole empowerment feeling and disempowerment feeling of the norm is where joy and revolution meet.
And yet, well, as a socialist, I would say, you know, you also need to, at some stage, take on power and take on the police and take on the army.
I agree.
You know, and that is a big thing. And for that, you need to have a program, an organization, and a vision of a you know, international organization, etc.
That's what Corbyn was. That's what Corbyn was trying to bring.
Exactly. And how do you get people to do that? You don't get people to do that by sitting around in rooms talking about a political program. You do it by getting out there and engaging it. You know, actually, isn't it Lenin? I'm probably wrong on this, who called revolution the carnival of the oppressed. You know,
he was quite keen on programs, though, old Lenin. I'm not sure quoting him is all that.
Was, but we have that. Seen on the program.
Okay, Comrade Ian, please.
Thank you. I keep coming to these meetings because of the healthy debate going on, but one comment tonight spurred me to speak for the first time. I'm a Labour Party member, a Momentum member, with no illusions about parliamentary democracy, so I might tell you where I stand. The left, as somebody said tonight, is not tiny. It's just not organised. And we're sitting here having a debate. It's a lovely debating meeting. I've loved these Monday meetings. But if it's education for the enlightened, I'm happy to be part of it. But what I think is needed, and it's been said by several speakers tonight, the working class has lost confidence. It's certainly lost confidence in the Labour Party, and I'm only hanging on because until the trade unions move somewhere else, because I ain't going into another party, and this is for Mr. Greenstein, who's not here tonight, I don't think. I'm not going into another party until the trade unions go with it. What I'd like to say tonight is we on the left can raise the confidence of the working class, and that's engaging in campaigns. And what we need, all we need, is a couple of victories. We've had them even here in North Devon. We stopped the closure of the A&E. They were going to close maternity. We managed to keep all the facilities, maternity, stroke, accident, and I always forget the other one, but pediatrics, I think it is. But the essence of confidence arises out of a victory. We have not had a victory since Jeremy Corbyn rallied our membership. And I'm looking at the two areas that we should be looking at: the trade unions and wage struggles. I think we need a strategy for those of us that are still in the Labour Party to beat the non-selection of left candidates. And I know a lot of you have been kicked out, and we've lost comrades in North Devon even. We lost our chair and our party delegate, Siobhan Strode, good comrade. The Occupy movement's been mentioned. I think we should think about where we're going to occupy, because little things like that, when people actually organise, and we're all capable of leading that and being involved with it, they have victories and they say, well, that works. So what else are we going to do? So and the NHS, of course, that's the big one. That's a big one. So there are areas I'm working. I'm not going to mention the Momentum campaign that I got a memo on because it's fresh, about BAME and LGBT about to be dismissed by Keir Starmer. So and there might be a campaign there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, comrade. John, please. Can you unmute? I'll click it again. No, you're muted, I'm afraid. I'll try it again. There should be a little window.
Yeah.
Pop up. There you go.
That's okay.
Yep, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I've been coming to these meetings for a while now. You know, again tonight, all very interesting, lots of different ideas, aspects as to how we build a joyful movement. I mean, basically. I mean, in the past, there has been, you know, through the various big strikes, so on and so on, people feel empowered, but as Glenn says, they go home and, you know, it only lasts for that time. So, but the sense of joy, I mean, you know, the saying of give me revolution, give me roses too. Yeah, I mean, I kind of consider comedy and laughter, you know, really very, very important. And at the moment, we're in a sort of situation where Jackie Walker was saying that, you know, somebody on the bed is dying, and you come home, and the nurse, and just feel useless. I actually have a neighbour who has a nurse, and she's going through exactly the same, you know, experience. But I suppose I mean, we are having these strikes now, and you know, we're not quite sure how all this is going to pan out, of course. But I mean, for the first time in history, nurses are going on strike. We had a demonstration here in Brighton. There was a real sense of solidarity, and so it's there. It's underneath. It's definitely there. I think it's you know, we've had so many defeats, but now I think the capitalism is in some kind of, you know, crisis. You know, worst since you know, probably 20s, late 20s with the crash. And this has all happened out of the crash. So it comes down to economics and basic things. And I do feel maybe, you know, something may come out of these strikes, may get some kind of development. But I'm of the opinion that, as the last speaker said, until the unions, you know, move to the you know, to a new party, it's very difficult to see where we're going. But I will carry, you know, I can carry on coming to these meetings. I particularly enjoyed the guy who was speaking about, you know, last week, who the anthropologist. He really did open up in your mind the imagination of, you know, that elsewhere in the world there are different societies, they live different. And of course, I don't really have much more to say, really. It's just that I thought that it's very important to keep that sense of joy and laughter.
Thanks, John. Actually, also important to remember that society, for vast majority, has lived together in very, very different ways compared to what we're doing now. You know, this class society is a very modern invention, and people have lived together in very different ways and a much more harmonious and egalitarian ways. We've got one more person from the floor, and then we're bringing Glenn and Norman back in to sum up. Alan, please.
I'd just like to say what we need to convey a message to the whole of the country, if we're talking about joy, that socialism underpins every success of capitalism or whatever. You need a successful socialist system underneath to underpin everything, so that you have successful jobs, higher pay, which generates more, like I said, more business, more sales, more money going into taxes, more money spending, more money going into indirect taxes, more money that can pay for mortgages, for rents, etc., 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 etc. You cannot have. We need to convey a message to all those at the top, all those greedy Tory bastards, that you cannot have a successful capitalist system without a successful socialist system underneath to underpin it. That's what I wish to say. We need to convey that message to everyone.
Or we overthrow it. Thank you, comrade. Okay, let's wrap this up. This was an interesting discussion. Norman, Glenn, do you want to come back to some of the things that comrade said?
He's muted.
He's muted, yeah.
You want to start, Glenn, then, until he can sort himself?
I think I'm unmuted.
Oh, you're unmuted now.
But go ahead, Glenn, go
on. In general, according to what Guy was just saying, and in general, I think that the revolution as such, particularly in the UK, because UK has, you know, Marx studied this economy because this was the most advanced capitalist model. So in a way, it's the kind of most post-capitalist in parts of it, I believe. Yeah. So some of the obvious failures that we see, some of the, the banking crash, and then, and we're kind of at the heart of this system, globally, I mean, we're in the richest 1% in the globe, and us and the Americans are at the very heart of this. So I think that in terms of organizing, and that is the key. I can't remember who raised that earlier on, but there's the key, organization. And just to finish on what I believe for this, relevant to this discussion, is that imagine a town where you have neighbourhood assemblies. Luton at the moment, its politics is like everywhere else. Once every 5 years, a third of us get involved, and that's it. But imagine vibrant neighbourhood assemblies in all 20 of our wards, which then feed into a town-wide one. Whatever the issue, good, bad, a problem, a challenge, or a joy thing, there's an organised community in a participatory way. And I think if we don't bring that shift about, we're going to be, this representative democracy model is going to take us all over the cliff and kill us all. That's what I believe. So, and it needs to be joyous, and it needs to be participatory, and it needs to be different. And that's what I think is where joy will come from. And it will be joyous when we achieve it.
Norman.
Yeah, no, all power to your elbow, Glenn. I think it sounds like a great vision. I really, really hope it works. I mean, you fear, though, in some things, well, with lots of things you fear. But I mean, I remember the biggest description I ever saw of revolutionary joy was in George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, when he talked about Barcelona, revolutionary Barcelona, before bad things happened. And it was a fantastic picture of people who felt that they were in charge of their lives, with little cameos like the barbers all pooling their businesses and sharing the money, and just cutting people's hair for free if they couldn't afford it, and stuff like that. And it was amazing. Of course, then the nasty thing happens. The Stalinist forces come and discredit and destroy the forces that were in Barcelona, and it was a totally different picture. So I think we do exactly have to do what you're doing, Glenn, but we have to watch for what the forces of reaction will do, because anything that challenges the establishment will be attacked, and attacked in a huge way. So we've got to have a strategy, a thought, a plan for how do we defend the joy, the assemblies, the communities. How do we defend it from the forces that they will first try to discredit it? They will try to say,
I know already. No,
you're all anarchists. You're all drug addicts. They will discredit every which way they can.
Yeah.
So we have to have that strategy to defend ourselves. That's all. Thanks.
Jackie.
That's absolutely true. And it's a great note to end on that. And as well, I think we've heard from a few people. I think it would be great to have Jerome and maybe a few other people back and really, really think about how other societies organize themselves for decision making, for example, and what people do to actually motivate people in other ways, because I really do think we need to get into some creative thought here, because like I'm saying, the planet is dying. We'll be all right because we'll be dead and gone, but my grandchildren won't be. And I find that a totally terrifying and a motivating force at the same time.
We need to learn from the past as well to build for the future and the past. And, all communist, most primitive communist societies can teach us a lot about how artificial and recent capitalism and class society really are. And that can inspire future societies and can inspire generations to fight for a better world. Thank you, comrades, for coming along tonight. It was a very interesting discussion. Next week, we want to look at direct action versus mass mobilization, or do we need both? I think that might be the answer, the third one. But we're discussing different types of direct action, including Just Stop Oil. Is that useful for the fight for socialism, a different society? Or perhaps are they putting off working class people? I'm sure we're going to have another interesting discussion. Thank you, comrades. Have a good evening. Thank you, Glenn, and Norman for coming along. Bye-bye.